My name is Mahiri. Um, I will kind of, I guess, like moderate this, like oversee some light moderation of this. We're really excited to have you and hear all that you're going to share about the work that you do. So we've kind of made a few questions, but I feel like you'll guide it really well and we'll take a lot away. So I'll kind of turn the floor over to you to introduce yourself and start off.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Mihiri, and thank you, Haliska, for inviting me to this audience. So my name is Rainita Narender, and I wear a couple of hats. All of it relates to public policy reform, specifically in the criminal justice system, and doing research on that. And so hopefully I can share a little bit of kind of what work I've been doing and ways that maybe it could be helpful for you all to think about. So on a high level, currently I'm working at Riverside County doing data analytics for the county to try to understand how various policy reforms are impacting criminal justice statistics. Prior to doing this current work, I was a PhD grad student at Claremont Graduate University, affiliated with the Computational Justice Lab. Which is a lab focused on trying to understand how various policies across the United States are going to impact, maybe negatively, maybe positively, maybe in intended, most likely in unintended ways, community members and stakeholders. So oftentimes we have these great policies that are intended to improve outcomes, but due to the lack of either data availability or use of data science within policy, decision making, we often don't know if the true policy intention gets realized or if there's any unintended consequences that come out in the way. So the work that I've primarily done throughout my time in my PhD program, as well as the current research I do, is trying to kind of glean a causal inference. So moving away from correlation and like just basic trends and try to see if I can causally evaluate how policy shocks impact various agencies. So I'm being super kind of high level, but like examples would be rehabilitation programs within California, such as individuals who have spent time in incarceration, programs that they may be considered for after their incarceration to help reintegrate them into society. Could be trying to just look at policies that we've voted in. Us as constituents have voted into law to see how that either improves or doesn't improve crime numbers. And it could just be about personnel as well. So we've had lots of pushes for increases and decreases to various personnel in the criminal justice system and how that impacts crime and other outcomes. So that's a little bit about my research. Aside from my research, I also am a visiting faculty at Pitzer College, which is a college in the Claremont Consortium. I teach statistics there, and I'm really interested in kind of helping develop and nourish kind of the next minds and decision makers in society. And so through my teaching at Pitzer, as well as advisement of other graduate students, I hope to work on projects that hopefully have policy relevance, not just for an academic audience. So those are kind of the different hats that I kind of have on right now. And it's a big transition period. I just recently defended my PhD in November of last year. So I'm a very recent grad and trying to kind of figure out next steps in my career on that end. So that's kind of just some high level background on me. I'm happy to go and dive deep. I'm prepared to talk a little bit more about my dissertation, but if there's any questions or any that like maybe stood out, I want to kind of give some time for the audience if they have questions at this point. Okay, I'm going to continue on that. I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to go into specifics about what it is that I worked on in my dissertation, of hopefully give a sense of, in this audience, if people want to go to grad school or if people are interested in seeing how research and causal inference research could help kind of communicate to real life application. So I think sometimes there's a hard time bridging the gap between super dense academic research and policy relevance and actionable kind of things to take away. And I think if you all maybe were to think about an economics PhD, you'd probably think, okay, it's finance related, it's something related with, GDP and macro. Well, there's actually a big move in economics to try to evaluate everyday policies that impact education, such as new funding sources, or it could be about employment, so about the labor market, or about the criminal justice system, which is what I'm interested in. And for my dissertation, I basically took 3 topics of recent policy changes and tried to measure kind of what happens in the wake of those policy changes to the intended outcomes. So for project number 1, I was interested in knowing what happens to 911 call takers. So in the United States and I guess in many countries, and I will say that all of my research just focuses on the US. So particularly this data set was in Texas, Dallas, Texas. There's 911 call takers that when we call for service, we want to hopefully get an officer or maybe other community members like the fire department or mental health agencies or personnel that can help respond to a crisis situation. In this research project, I wanted to see what was the effect of 911 call takers using certain language in their notes, transcribing to the first responders in the first responders' reaction once arriving to the call for service. Meaning, do they arrest people? Do they use force? Specifically, I was wanting to look at what was the effect of their race mention, what was the effect of other demographics mentions on that. And this is what we call like an endogenous variable. And so to not go too deep in the weeds, I guess the main overarching thing that I want to kind of get taken away is that when we're often trying to look at these relationships between variables in statistics, in data analysis, we often face the problem of correlation does not mean causation. And so we have to find some way around that. And econometrics and causal inference particularly allow us to take something when it's like a coin flip chance. Maybe you could think at random that someone gets assigned to that call or assigned to that job or task, and take that random events and leverage the randomness to test some end outcome. So just kind of diving a little bit deep in the weeds on that is an example on, how one can use econometrics, data science, statistics to answer like a social science question that maybe we're interested in, is how does training across 911 call takers impact our service? So taking it down to like an individual level, like you or I or someone in our neighborhood calls 911 for help, perhaps there's a theft or something like this. We want equitable treatment. We hope, I think, as citizens that we're not going to have different treatment depending on who we get randomly assigned to. And if we see that there are differences, that could cause issue. Perhaps that means that, we're going to get a different level of care or a different level of treatment, I guess, depending on who we get assigned to. So I think that's the policy relevance of doing research like that. And so I guess, why I bring this up in this platform is, from my understanding, there's many students and people who are interested in learning more about ways to, help the community, especially in educating youth on different types of careers that are out there using data science. And I kind of want to try to not make it confusing, not make it unapproachable, but make it interesting that even though math and statistics at the like rudimentary basic level might not be the most exciting thing, if you really commit and spend time working on it in an advanced level, you will be able to do some cool things and maybe answer some questions that you may wonder, just wonder about the world. Using the tools of econometrics, using the tools of math, statistics. And Haliska has mentioned to me, you guys are able to and have been awarded the ability to use ArcGIS. So I do want to spend some time talking about that as well as a tool to help map out data. I'm going to take a pause. I've talked about really dense things. I want to see kind of if you guys have any thoughts around the room. Maybe Haliska, you can help me if I'm totally veering off the trajectory, or you think I can touch on anything that would be helpful. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't hear you.
This is really on point.
Okay, amazing.
So one of your policies you have talked about was about rehabilitation. I know there's a lot of money given into mental health, but rehabilitation does not get money, right? So again, our community is focused on the rehabilitation process. Again, also the 911 callers. How much of expense does this incur to the cities where we live? Because we get the 911 callers, then we have this protocol of the fire department and police all coming in at the same time. So that's quite an expense to the system, right? So is that where the policy you talk about is relevant?
Yeah, definitely. So the thing that you're touching on with the expenditures is another thing that economists I think do really well is cost benefit analyses. So typically, there's a few ways, I guess, to kind of measure like various policy changes. One is let's figure out if the costs overweigh the benefits. The other is to see, what is the, repercussions of the outcome in layers. So the idea is like, if 911 call takers are going to have, different ways of handling calls. And if I get one call taker over a different, it may lead to a higher likelihood of arrest, higher likelihood of use of force. Is that going to have downstream effects for the suspect or the person on the receiving end of that? And that could be through incarceration, that could be through a mismatch of person that's a suspect versus person that actually committed the crime, which could then lead to, further like negative effects within certain socioeconomic demographics. So you could imagine that if there's certain types of like all types that are getting that are occurring within certain communities, there could be differential impacts within certain socioeconomic communities, so underprivileged community versus not. So those are kind of the policy effects I'm looking at in that paper. But I do agree, cost benefit analyses are great. The only kind of tricky thing on the perspective or lens of an economist is like, when we think about the benefits of the programs, there's like the immediate benefits of public safety, and perhaps it could be about providing assistance to the community. But then there's like maybe secondary and tertiary benefits that are hard to kind of put into numbers. So it could be, well, there was no recidivism of this crime. This person was apprehended, so there wasn't, he didn't or she didn't, burglarize or, cause theft across the whole neighborhood. It was just one house. And so how do we predict the rate at which that person would have recidivated had they have not been apprehended? So these are the things that I think get a little bit gray area and murky when we're trying to do cost benefit analyses, but important things to think about. And then going on your other question about rehabilitation and mental health. So one of the main projects that I've worked on in my time doing research is trying to collaborate and request access to data from California Department of Correction Rehabilitation. And this is a partnership to do a research study on a recent rehabilitation program they've offered for individuals who have paroled for having more kind of serious crimes that have caused them to spend quite a bit of time in incarceration. And the kind of idea here is that depending on how much time is spent in these different incarceration environments, it becomes very difficult to reintegrate back into society. And one of the goals that CDCR currently or recently has had is to add rehabilitation, which is just a way to kind of make it so that people have some guidance, people have some training, some vocational training, some outlets to be able to transition back into the labor market in a way that's how do I say it? In the formal labor market, not the informal labor market, I guess is the way to say it. And so, during that time that I worked on requesting this data, I had the opportunity, I worked in an internship for a research organization to speak to the community providers. So I was able to speak to the people that actually provided the rehabilitation. And many of them were saying that mental health has been like a huge issue within the jails, within the prisons, but the funding has actually suffered a lot, especially in light of COVID. And I do think there has been, perhaps like in the past year or so, a little bit more attention brought to the necessity for like not only medication, but more like psychologist therapy available within jails and prisons. But you're definitely true in saying that as it currently stands, we maybe don't have the data doesn't support that we have enough funding as we do have the demand for this. And I can point you two and the group to a bunch of research papers that have theories about, how the rates of recidivism are not the same if you look at someone who suffered from mental health problems versus not. And that, ends up becoming a systemic and cyclical pattern. So it's definitely something that requires more attention and research.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Any questions from anyone else?
I have a question. I'm kind of like interested in the logistics of it because you mentioned that you do the like data analytics for the county. And then you also say like use it to kind of predict the outcomes. So I first thought it's like kind of just to work with all the data, but how does it work? Like you collect the data, then you try to predict the outcomes and then to try to meet it there like in the future, just the whole logistics of what data analytics people do. It's kind of like interesting. If you wouldn't mind like giving it to the folks who don't know much about statistics.
Yeah, I would love to. I'd love to break it down. So it's very different depending on who your audience is, right? So as a PhD student working on academic publication papers, those are like the papers that honestly everyday people don't read, and policymakers sometimes read, sometimes don't. Not because it's the fault of the policymaker, it's because of it's so dense. It's very dense, it's hard to follow along. And so there's kind of like three different things. There's like the academic publications that are hard to kind of read. Then there's the policy reports that different institutions will make that are easier for non-academic audiences to kind of take and glean insights. But usually it's like really descriptive level data, not causal inference. Have it is, sometimes it's not. And then the third thing is like working at an organization and then producing statistics for them, which is kind of what I'm doing, where I'll have what I think the organization will want, but I also get requests from the organization on what they want. And so it really depends on the organization you work with. So typically you have raw data that they have that's not really meant to be used for analysis. And you kind of have to clean the data in a way. So reorganize the data so that it can be used in a useful way. So step one would be, take the raw data, ingest it, clean it, change the way the variables are structured in order to have it in a usable format. So most data tables that you'll see that are publicly available are already clean. They already have usable columns. You'll know that column 1 is equal to whatever variable in column 2, so on. But typically internal management systems are not going to be like that. So that's step 1. Step 2 is going to be, it depends on your research question or what you're trying to do. So if I'm trying to do some basic descriptive stats, like I want to know over time, how many individuals were arrested for felonies, I could maybe draw, some descriptive plots, like some time series plots. So I guess step 2 would be learn from your data. Before you do any analysis, like real analysis, you want to understand with graphics, is there missingness? Is something incorrect in my data? Are are there any discrepancies that maybe would draw me down some path where I would assume or interpret an analysis incorrectly? So you don't want to rush to the analysis, because if your data is like missing or misspecified, you may end up getting some result that's not true. It's just a data problem. So being able to identify that is very important. It's kind of like a data audit. So that would be step number 3, is graphing just the descriptions of the data. And then step number 4 is like, okay, now that I've made sure that my data is valid, made sure it like is comprehensive, maybe censored out data like that doesn't make sense, it's bad, let me now do an analysis. So analysis means like, really basic level, could mean predicting, could mean trying to measure this policy shock happens, in July, what do my numbers look like in totals afterwards? Is there a big drop in the numbers, big increase in the numbers? Is there a causal effect? That would be like looking at it over time. If you're not interested in looking at over time, you might just be interested in looking at it, in the aggregates. So across all the years, what's the average? But depending on kind of what your question is, you're going to have to change the way you approach the analysis. So I would say, it doesn't even fully require, I don't know. I don't think it requires a PhD. I do think it requires just like spending some time learning about data, statistics, and reading some textbooks. A lot of this, as long as you have the theory down and you've had the chance to practice, I do think it starts becoming a little bit more easier how to approach these problems. But it's creative and it's a little bit tough because I actually just had a meeting today with my interns. It's different from the classroom setting because, you don't have set problem sets. You don't have set guidelines. You have usually messy data and you're trying your best to automate a way to clean the data and do analysis. So it can be challenging, but I think it's very rewarding. And the nice thing is these organizations can then just use that same programming code that you produce to update the analysis every so often. So, I would say learning some programming is beneficial if you don't want to have to do everything by hand and spend months and months doing things by hand.
Oh, so there's that type of a tools that you use to actually sort out through the data. So is it more like a mathematical, or are there something like each of us can use, or is it mostly available just for the people who work in these fields?
Oh yeah, it's available to anyone. So it's free and open access, and I have resources for free and open access textbooks that I teach to my students in the statistics class at Pitzer College. So primarily I use R Studio, and I use Python. These are all available for free. And there is a plethora, I can't even express, a plethora of YouTube channels and, resources out there. So all the peers that I work with, and even myself, never learned this in school. Got to grad school, kind of had to figure it out on our own. And so it's definitely doable to just kind of, if you have the time. Of course, there's limitations, right? Like it's hard if someone's working multiple jobs. Like it's easy for me to say it's easy, but maybe it's not, depending on everyone's constraints. But if you have the bandwidth, I do think it's something that could be picked up. And there's so many resources for practice dataset problems. So there's some communities where they have openly accessed data sets, and it tells you a prompt, and then it sees it'll check your work and see if it's correct or not. So, and I'm happy to share that. I can either throw that in the chat, some of these resources that I'm talking about, or I can also share it with Holiska if there's a way that that she has to kind of.
Oh, thank you. Yes, we can put them in chat.
So when you talk about data sets and raw data, tell us how should we start? Where do we start?
Yeah, so can you give me a little bit more? So where do we start, in terms of what?
So now, do we start collecting our raw data from surveys or from the Census Bureau, or we say we're working in District 1? How do we start mapping our data?
Yeah, definitely. So for the ArcGIS, let me think that as a backdrop. If we want to map the data, like there's some set ways to do this. So the first thing is like Census has on the Census website, they have .shp files, probably going too much in the minutia, but they have .shapefiles that basically kind of gives the geographic boundaries for each census tract. And you could also do it within a different like unit. So maybe actually, let me see if I can pull this up really quickly. And I can perhaps even share my screen if that's possible and kind of give a visualization. It might be a little bit easier than me just talking. Okay, so let's see if I can do this. Okay. So I think you all hopefully can see my screen okay. And if not, let me know. Census is a very I would say it's a great resource to start if you want to just explore what data is available. They have an amazing open data set source that I think is pretty user-friendly. It's just pretty straightforward, data.census.gov. And it's going to be, as easy as just searching up a table. So I could look something like poverty. Perhaps maybe I'm interested in looking at the poverty levels. And it will start telling me, what's the poverty levels in the United States. It'll tell me what survey it gets this data from, and then it'll break down even more specific elements within poverty. The cool thing is, maybe I don't want to look at all of the United States. Perhaps I only want to look within a specific subsection. So it could be that I want to look only within a specific county. So you'll have to remind me, Haliska, what county are you all in?
Riverside County.
Riverside County. Okay, wonderful. So if we go to Riverside County, we can select the data just from there. And this will provide us just an overview of poverty. And you can see the map actually also comes here too, within just Riverside County. Similarly, how I search poverty, I could search up a bunch of different surveys and topics. So some topics are education, employment, families and living arrangement, health, housing, income, poverty, populations, people, race, ethnicity. So this is one way to just get a sense of like demographics within your community. Aside from that, there's also a way to download .shapefiles within your community. So let's say I want to draw one of these graphs here. I want to know what are the boundaries for these little blocks that exist within Riverside County. There's going to be these little block groups. If I want to be able to get these little, you can see that some of these are like rectangles, some of them are other rectangular figures. If I want to get the boundaries of these different shapes, I can download that file and upload that into ArcGIS as a background map. And then whatever I want to plot over that background map, like perhaps I want to look at crime rates, or I want to look at numbers of mental health resources within the certain county or region of the county, I can just overlay that on just this county's map. So I would say if you wanted to do a graphical kind of representation within your county, I don't think it's super difficult. It may be a small learning curve, but there's definitely stuff out there to help kind of guide that process. Even if I recently did a project where I had latitude and longitudes, I did not have the little rectangular units, the census blocks. There is even code to convert the latitude and longitudes into census blocks. So it'll tell you, what address exists in what little block. So it depends on what your goal is and what it is you're trying to study. You mentioned surveys as well, Haliska. So perhaps you wanted to do a survey in Riverside County, or maybe particularly in Palm Springs area, you could do a survey about whatever the topic is that you wanted to study, and maybe you wanted to look at the variation of the outcome of the survey across the county. That's something that you could utilize ArcGIS and the Esri software to do. So it really just depends. It depends on what functionality you want, but it's a great tool if you want to geographically compare things, the nice thing is you can make heat maps. So that I would say that's a really nice benefit if you want to look at the variation in certain types of crime or resources across the county. And some counties will already have this publicly available. They would have already produced this. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to do a quick search to see what I can find in Riverside County, because I believe there is an interactive map, Riverside County from Census, that you can layer on. You can layer on some different demographics that you all might be interested in. But does that kind of help? I mean, I'm trying not to go too much into minutia, because once I go in, it's gonna get not so much fun. It won't be as fun.
So we are working in District 1 in Palm Springs.
Okay. So in District 1, can you remind me how exactly the districts are partitioned? Is it like within certain census tracts, certain block groups, or maybe if you're not sure, that's okay as well?
I'm not sure, actually. Maybe census tracts.
Yeah, so I think, you know, for any of the ArcGIS maps you want to create, you want to kind of see what census blocks or tracts are within, basically within that, that district.
Mhm.
If I can maybe give, let's see, maybe I can add, see, census tract. Okay, so here's kind of an idea. This is the county overall, what we have here. This is all of Riverside County. Now, if I wanted to add a layer of looking at the census tract, that's going to be a little bit bigger than the census block group. So all of these little units, these geographical boundaries, these represent the various census tracts that census defines. They change, they do have the ability to change, so they may change over years, depending on how much migration there is within certain tracts versus outside of. But you'll notice like certain areas, like in the desert, there's not going to be a lot of partitions. About very areas that are more geographically dense, population dense, more people are living, you're going to see smaller, you know, it's broken up into smaller components. So this is the tract. If I want to go even deeper, I could look at the block groups. So the block groups are like a neighborhood. So here you see even smaller geographical units within Riverside County. This is kind of like 3 neighborhoods of the block group. So if I had to guess my best without doing a lot of research, the division is probably not going to be already defined in census. It's probably going to be something that might require some research of a crosswalk of what block groups exist in Division 1. And that might be some research. That might be the first step, is trying to figure out if I want to attach data like poverty, income, education, stuff that's already existing in census. I want to know what block groups I should be adding that data for to be specifically within Division 1.
Okay.
But I would say that just looking at the census website in general gives you a really good sense of like the density, and you can take let's see, is this it? State legislative district, is this what you were mentioning, Haliska?
Yeah, District 1.
Okay, so let's see if they perhaps have. Okay, yeah, so here are the various like subcategories it allows someone to kind of look within. So let's see, congressional district, if we can pull District 1.
Or would it work if you use zip code?
Okay, so the things with zip codes, I recently learned about this. I thought zip codes were amazing because, you know, I've always had the same zip code. Apparently they change all the time. Apparently they change even more often than the block groups and the census tracts. I'm not quite sure why. It doesn't make sense to me because, you know, in my head, zip codes are definite, but apparently they change over time, which could change your analysis if you want to look multi-year. If you just were interested in this year, It's not going to impact anything. Then zip codes are the way to go.
Okay.
So I think this is giving me all congressional districts within California. Let's see if there is a way. And would you say this is District 1 within California?
No,
Sorry.
Palm Springs. Palm Springs.
Within Palm Springs. So yeah, sorry for my naivety with this. I'm more familiar with census tract and block groups. I don't want to kind of guide you in the wrong direction, but there's various districts. There's voting districts. Let's see. There was also congressional districts. So perhaps this is something that we could do more research on, unless you know which one of these districts you all fall into.
Anyone? Is Edwin here? Is Edwin in the crowd? Probably no.
No.
Okay.
There's a 3-digit zip code. So if that's
so
again, that would require a crosswalk.
So our zip code is 92262, which is the second district.
Okay, 92262. Let me see if I can grab that real quick. So it's just the first 3-digit prefix. So let's do 9.
So what is the best?
922. This would just let me see that location. Let's see if it's able to pull it up correctly. It could be that I also have a million layers on select a few of these.
How do those layers work?
Yeah, good question. So I maybe I can also pop this in the chat as well. So I basically just went to Census website to look for the maps that they have pre-selected, and here I cleared all the layers, but at the top it allows me to add a layer, and so it gives me different options of geographical units that Census has basically defined that they capture data within. So Census actually doesn't just have data on the state or on the city or on the county. They go all the way down to the census tract level, sometimes even the block group level. And so there's a few different, I guess I should backtrack. There's a few different data sources that you could be getting this demographics data from. One of them is Census. Another one is called the American Community Survey. The benefit, I guess, trade-off benefit is that Census is going to cover all comprehensive data. It'll cover data for almost every household it has the chance to get. American Community Survey is a sample, so it's not going to get every city and every household. And so it's supposed to be represented, but it's not going to be exact. So I guess like high level thing with statistics, the best as we can get to the total population is the better. If we have a sample, we hope that the sample represents and generalizes to the population, but it's not necessarily going to. And so people kind of have their opinions of which one's better, ACS or Census. Probably too much information, maybe not. But to add the layers, you can just select what geographic level you want. So here I see divisions. So this is just state level divisions. So let's see if there's a different level of division. Let's see, we could maybe try congressional district. I think that's what you're referring to if I had to guess. Aliska, and let me make sure to also filter so that this only is looking at Riverside County. And let's see if it gives us anything fruitful. Okay, so Riverside County, no, it doesn't look like that was helpful. Yeah, we might have to look more about this on line because it looks like they have so many different divisions of district. There's so many definitions. And so the thing you want to make sure, I guess ground one, zero step, step zero on the project is making sure that the way that they define division here is equitable to the way that you're thinking about division. And that could be just a gut check to look at what the map looks like. And since you live in this area, you would know, okay, yes, this is the correct area that I want to look at. Or it could just be there's a crosswalk that exists that breaks it apart. So I'm going to go back to the kind of geographic, let's see, I'm going to go back to the census block group. So this is the smallest level that you could get the data in. And the thing with the block group data is usually it's going to be every 10 years, right? The census is decennial. So if you wanted to look at year-over-year patterns, the ACS gives you 5-year estimates every 5 years. So it could be better depending on how often or frequent you want to see the data. To grab data on census website, you could quite literally just select this and then perhaps view the profile. And it's going to have some small kind of overview of the data here. And it looks like there's no data for this specific block group, but it has some information on housing. So this is population data. Let's see if it has anything on race and ethnicity. So this is just giving me an overview. This is very helpful if I just want to learn what the data looks like. This kind of like data view of, viewing the profile is not super helpful for data analysis because I kind of want a data table that has all the rows and the columns of the data. It's just nice to kind of learn about kind of like an overview. So, this is a nice interactive tool to learn kind of what demographics data look like and how they're partitioned. I think if we wanted to kind of look at an analysis, let me show you what that data would look like. So let's say I want to not look at the map, but I want to look at tables. Here's an example of data on race. And I believe this is still filtered to only look at Riverside County. So this is looking at the entire county, not just within District 1, not just within Palm Springs. And it's giving me the race by various categories. So it's going to give me race by these categories that are captured by census, as well as the combination of multiple races. And this isn't super helpful if I want to break it down by the small little blocks. So if I wanted to break it down by the small blocks, I could say I want to look at all of the block groups within Riverside County. I can select Riverside County and I can do all block groups. Let's say you found out that, hey, Division 1 exists only in Census Tract 100. Then you could even select, I only want to look at 100. So it allows you to kind of look at that deeper thing. Since we don't know yet which census tract is correlated or coexisting with Division 1, we'll just select all of it. And now here we have, I think it's Iris. Raise your hand. Go for it.
Now, does the census break down to names and addresses since it does the racial components as well?
That's a wonderful question. So because of anonymity, it is not going to break it down by the names and the addresses, just for, protection of someone not just publicly seeing the data and then showing up at someone's address, right? So it will not break things down, ever to that level. The block group is the closest to that kind of neighborhood level you'll get. It's still not like the actual neighborhood. It's about like 2 to 3 neighborhoods. And that's going to be as small or granular as a level. Though I have worked with some criminal justice agency databases, and I recently was looking at one today with one of my co-authors on a project in New York that had the latitude and the longitude for all 911 calls for service. And so that would have the specific address, but typically they won't provide any demographics. It'll just have information like what was the call about, how many officers responded, How long did it take them to respond? I will say though, the laws are kind of coming into place that allow, you, me, any one of us to request data from agencies. So there's something called the California Public Records Act request. It's called a CPRA is the acronym. And it allows that if we're interested in knowing certain information from an agency, we can request that to their CPRA office. We could say, hey, I'm interested in knowing number of arrests made within this specific police agency. And you could perhaps request the race of the suspects or the victims, but it's not a guarantee that they'll provide that information in order to maintain security for the public and not put that out there. So when this is doing the average on, this is self-reporting. It could be, I have seen in some data that some people actually change, or there's an evolution in their ethnicity where they feel like they're associated with one race and then over time maybe feel that they're associated with a different race. Or for instance, when census did not always have the option for two or more races. And so maybe, if you look over time, there might look like there's shifts in, the trends, and it may not be that there's just more or less of one race. It could just be the way that questions were being asked in the survey, the way people were responding. That's another thing to kind of think about institutionally when you're looking at this data, is why are there changes and breaks? Is it because there's an actual effect, or is it because the underlying data generating process changed at all?
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So for this example with the Riverside County, we broke it down by census blocks now. Let's see, if we look here, let me go back to the tables that they had. Let's see if I can filter, and let's go back to geography. Let's go back to block group. And going to California, and then we're just going to pick everything in Riverside County. Pick all of these. Okay, so if we look at this one, that looks like age and sex, they show it in the map as well as in the form of the table. If we wanted to do analysis, we're going to want to use the table version. I haven't played too much with the maps. I think it takes quite a bit of time to load. So if you see at the bottom here, it's trying to kind of load what that looks like. So I'm just going to switch over to the tables. It might be a little bit easier for us. So here it's giving me Riverside County as a total. It still hasn't actually broken it down by census block groups. So what that means is that this survey only was county-wide estimates, did not give me block groups. So if you're looking and searching for data, you want to make sure that it, provides it to you at the level that you're looking for. And even if you filter it for that level, it may not exist. So it looks like here, it still is giving me county level data. One thing I can try is remove the county level filter and only look at the block group level filter. And it'll usually give you this error that the table is too large to display. It gives you an option, open the table anyway. I usually kind of do that. It just means it's going to take some time for it to process. Another option is you could download the table. But I just want to kind of give you guys a sense, because I've talked very high level of like what a raw data set looks like. So I wouldn't even call this raw. It's kind of like half processed. So Census has done a lot of work to make this user friendly. And it has the totals for in census's race. They also have sex by age. Let's maybe do, let's see. I wanted to see if they had income data. Let's see if they have total population. That might be an easier one to look at. So here, if we look at the total population, it has each block group and each census tract that block group is within. So if we think back at the maps, the block groups are the smallest little dots and the census tract is a little bit bigger. So multiple block groups within the bigger one, and then a bunch of census tracts make up the big county. That's the biggest one. And you'll notice that they have like estimates of how many people they believe live within the different block group census tracts and what's the margin of error. So an important thing is when you have these large surveys, even though we hope that we, are able to capture all the data in the population, that's not always going to be the case. There's always going to be a margin of error or inconsistencies where sometimes we can't get responses from everyone on the survey. So it's very important when you do surveys to calculate something like this so that you know how good or valid your results are. So if I wanted to use this for an analysis, I could maybe take this table, download it as a CSV, and I could, merge it onto a different data set, perhaps for education, and I could see, is there a relationship with number of individuals that are pursuing education and the population within that census tract? Or I could do something like, is there a relationship between the funding for education or for mental health resources within that block group and the number of people that live there? Maybe there's a difference. Maybe specific specific block groups that are very high in population density, maybe some of them that are more in the urban area have more funding for mental health resources and some in the rural areas don't, or maybe vice versa. And that's where the graph comes into play, is you can kind of get a sense of urban versus rural in terms of the funding. So if you wanted to play with this data, it's as easy as looking it up and pressing CSV and it downloads for you. Now it's on my computer. So hopefully I haven't bored everyone. I kind of went down into the weeds over it, but and there's so much to go over. This is just like a small little snippet, but there's not that much time left, so I'd love to kind of take time for questions.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It was really awesome, and it was very in-depth, but it was still really good and really informative. So I appreciate that and your time.
Awesome, thank you.
So I'm on the Census Data website right now, and I actually just searched Palm Springs City
Okay.
instead of, I guess, city. And
Okay.
there, I could see, like, I drilled into Palm Springs, and then I looked at persons under 18 years,
Mhm.
and they had that data, and notably, it's from the ACS versus from the
The census.
10-year census.
Mhm.
And then if I switched, let's see, let me try switching. I don't remember how I got to this, but then, like you said, I can pick the different categories,
Mhm.
and then if they're on the categories, then it's there. Like for population data, that
Mhm.
wasn't available. So when I went to persons under 18, then I could, I could see that information. Or if I wanted to see, I don't know, something random, veterans, how many veterans
wow.
I got with the. Hold on, it's loading.
Yeah, it takes quite a bit of time to load. My computer has crashed a few times trying to load up the data. So
Oh, there is some data.
Renita,
There are 3,300 veterans in Palm Springs City. So just it doesn't look like it drills down to District 1 or District 2 or the other districts, but it looks like on here there's information at the city level.
yeah, and you could always calculate that yourself, right? If you could find the block
For the-
group associated.
I think Devon has a question.
I just wanted to make a comment that the data.census.gov website is a very useful website. That's something I gleaned out of the meeting tonight.
Amazing.
I'll definitely will be using that.
Amazing. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Any other questions? What about storytelling? Anything that you used in your dissertation on storytelling?
Yeah, so that's the kind of magic, right? It's like I spend a lot of time learning all these like, weird, complicated math things to kind of like try to make causal relationships. And then, the end all product is how do you package it, right? Where I'm not just sitting here and talking about boring things. So storytelling is a must, no matter how advanced you go in the programming or the econometrics or whatever it is. You need to package your story so that it's can be communicated and accessible to your audience, and also has a pattern or some information to glean. So definitely use storytelling. Definitely still working on it. I feel like I've been a programming kind of like nerd geek for the past 5 years, but now working in the county, talking to people that have no idea what I do, I'm having to do lots of storytelling to kind of narrate the end all goal and purposes of like why it's worth to go through these like data expeditions. So, I mean, just writing a paper in general, that's a lot of storytelling. It's a lot of laying out assumptions, laying theoretical models, laying out the beginning to the end product, and then just doing any project, any summary statistics. It's one thing to create a data plot. It's another thing to kind of tell the viewer what you should get out of it. I think the best thing, and maybe the scariest thing that happens in the world, is we get presented a bunch of statistics and there's a title that tells us what we're supposed to take out of it. And, the first thing I teach my students day one in stats class, be a little bit reluctant to buy into it. Really try to like be questioning the data, the underlying data, see if it really, the title, is it just a salacious title to get clicks, or is it really truly representing the data well? So it's like a trade-off. You want to storytell, but you don't want to oversell. You want to be clear about the limitations, especially if the work you do is going to be used in a policy realm.
So would you go through with, would you do your storytelling on QR codes, or how would you?
Like, what do you mean by that?
So like, Esri has this QR codes where on mental health, where they track the stories on these QR codes. And so you find a lot of young people buying into using the QR code to listen to the stories, which I think is very important if we are looking at change.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is like storytelling at its most root level is how do you take anecdotal experiences and communicate that to a broader audience to kind of maybe create more awareness, right, and demand. So I interacted in that way of like trying to distill everyday people's opinions. I had the opportunity to speak to, like I said, like hundreds of community-based providers, and I was able to interview them and try to distill their stories in a proposal to work with data. But I do think it's very nice to make that publicly accessible. There's so much to go into that though, right? So there's like making sure the person is okay with that information being shared, especially with mental health domain. I think sometimes it's difficult for people to want to remain anonymous. And I'm sure there's ways to kind of get around that by making it so that the person's information isn't disclosed. But I do think it's a powerful tool. I think the biggest thing I learned with data is you don't want to get stuck thinking about just numbers, right? So I gave you guys all these numbers of how many people exist in this and that. These are real people's lives. When we do this policy analysis, we want to think about how it's going to impact people, and anecdotal stories are the way to kind of prime your audience to make them aware of why what you're doing is important.
Right. Wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully it wasn't too boring. But you guys are a great audience, and I loved all the questions, and I'm happy for follow-ups. If you guys have any, I can throw my email in the chat. You guys are more than welcome to reach out to me.
Boring. Heck no, it was interesting.
Amazing.
Because very often people get scared by it, right? So here we are as we are one united to educate people on how important data collection and quantitative measurements are.
Yeah, most definitely. I really appreciate the work that you all are doing, and I appreciate the platform, Haliska and to Mihiri, to kind of provide this support for the community. I think integrating as much tools and information at the ground level is really the way forward with how we're going in society and the use of data integration. I can say that there's a huge push. If you look at legislation reforms, I can give you some examples of bills that basically say we have to be transparent with data. So as much as we can get used to working with data, the better it is, I think, moving forward.
Are there, yeah, that's true. Are there any more like questions? Does anyone else have anything they want to ask or add before we set off on the rest of our evening? Okay, I'll take that as a no, but it was really great to meet you, Renita, and hear more about your work. And I think everyone took your email, and I'm sure you'll be bombarded with a lot of questions and follow-up emails soon. So thank you very much.